Welcome to the Woodstock Public Library's Evening Book Club. This evening, we are pleased to have many of our regular attendees with us, as well as a number of our special guests. So I'd like to take just a moment to welcome each and every one of you to this evening's book club. We also have with us this evening a very special guest. This evening, we are fortunate to have with us the winner of the 2021 Giller Prize, Omar El Akkad, for his latest book, What Strange Paradise. Welcome, Omar. It's a remarkable thing for a small book club in the heart of southwestern Ontario to be hosting such a noteworthy author. How might this have come about, you might ask? Omar, you have a connection to this part of the world. Would you just take a moment, if you would, to explain to our audience what that connection is?
Yeah, I'm married into southwestern Ontario. My degree's from Queens. Excuse me, a very long time ago, I was in first year at Queens studying computer science. Excuse me, and down the hall was a young woman named Teresa, who came from just outside Watford. We met, we started dating a couple of months later. We recently celebrated the 21st anniversary of that first date. And so when I come back to Canada, I usually spend a considerable amount of time out near where you are.
Thank you. I imagine some people were wondering just how it came to be that you came to come to our humble little book club in southwestern Ontario. We were actually talking about your visiting our club before you were shortlisted for the Giller Award. I will say that when that list came out and I saw your title on it, I was feeling pretty good about the chances of your winning this year. I did have a second choice, Mary of Twos. I thought she had a fairly good chance too. So it was wonderful to see. When I found out that you had won the award, I thought that was so very exciting. It was a remarkable event, the first in-person event for the Giller Awards in 2 years. Do you want to say just a few words about what it was like to be in that place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
about who your special guest was.
First of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate everyone's patience and everyone attending tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, the Gillers was surreal because it was, in addition to obviously being in person after a hiatus, it was also the first big in-person thing that I'd done in about 2 years. You know, because I'd taken a break before the pandemic, and then during the pandemic, it was all Zoom events. And then suddenly I have to pull out the one tuxedo that I own, that I put on every 6 or 7 years, go to this incredibly lavish hotel that, had the good people of Scotiabank not paid the bill for, I would never have been let in through the door. I mean, it's not the kind of place that I would regularly stay at under any conditions. And you're in this big ballroom, and, you know, John Irving is there, and Margaret Atwood is there, and all of these people who, you know, at least in my reading life, sort of exist in the stratosphere. And so most of the night was spent with this little voice in my head just saying, you know, keep it together, keep it together. Don't make an ass of yourself. Don't make an ass of yourself. I mean, it was a fantastic night. I brought my mom along. She, I've been fortunate enough to be nominated for a couple of awards in my life, and my mom was starting to think that she was cursed because every time I brought her to one of these ceremonies, I lost. And so this was the first time in some 30 years that she actually saw me win something. Anyone who saw the speech that I gave, the rambling, I've never watched it, and I never will. I'll never go back. But I had nothing prepared. I was convinced all of the books were terrific, but I was convinced I had no chance. So I was sort of making it up as I went along. But the really odd thing about it is that, you know, you go up on stage, you give your speech, and then immediately afterwards, they whisk you off through a service entrance into the kitchen, the hotel kitchen, and you take the service elevator up to the 17th floor. where there's the media is assembled in this lounge because you have to do the media interviews right afterwards because all the newspaper deadlines are coming up in the evening. So I give my speech, they whisk me away, we go through the service entrance, we go through the kitchen, we get into the elevator, which immediately breaks down. And so there's 7 of us sitting there in the elevator. So the first 20 minutes of my life as a Giller Prize winner, I spent in an elevator waiting for the fire department to come get us. Finally, we sort of clawed the doors open and went up there. It was a strange night for a number of reasons.
Well, it seems that technology hits us in all places. Yeah. Well, it was a really good place for the Giller community, I think, to choose your book. I don't know, my humble opinion counts for anything, but I think it's a brilliant book. So thank you. More technical issues. Okay, so my question was how your experience as a journalist informed the writing of this story, and where the original idea for the story came from.
Sure, yeah. So the original sort of impetus for it was, so I was born in Egypt. I grew up in the Middle East, and for about 10 years after I graduated college in Canada, I worked as a journalist for the Globe and Mail. And in 2012, I was back in Egypt. I was covering the aftermath of the Arab Spring. And I was driving around Cairo with an old high school buddy of mine who was complaining about the rent. You know, the rent's too high, the rent's too high. And at one point I just asked him, you know, so what's the price for an apartment in your building, for example? And he said, well, do you mean the locals price or do you mean the Syrians price? I said, what is the Syrians price? What are you talking about? He said, well, there's been this influx of refugees who've come down to Egypt from Syria. And those folks you can charge 3 times as much. I mean, what are they going to do? Go somewhere else? And it quickly became apparent that this wasn't just an apartments thing. This was across the board. You know, you go down the street to buy fruits and vegetables, the vendor catches your accent, they put 2 and 2 together, and suddenly they know that they can exploit you with no consequence. And so originally the impetus for the novel was to talk about the casualness of that cruelty, how easy it is to take the most vulnerable people on earth, people who have no leverage in any situation, and effectively do whatever you want to them, both actively and passively. You know, you can exploit them actively, but you can also ignore that they exist entirely, which is, you know, a central reaction to the migrant crisis across the Mediterranean is for folks on this side of the planet to simply ignore it, because what are the consequences of ignoring it? Nothing. So that's when I first started thinking about the things that eventually, over the course of many years, became this book. Over the time that I started writing it, there were, you know, this seemingly endless stream of news stories about folks, you know, who didn't make it. And one of the things about those stories is that they would show up on my Twitter feed, or they would show up on social media wrapped in this bubble of outrage. And then within 24 hours, everyone would forget about it. We would all move on to the next thing that was the subject of outrage. And I wanted to do the opposite of that. I wanted to dwell. And so a novel, I think, is a good place to dwell on something. It's long form enough that you can do that. So that was the impetus for it. And of course, it's deeply intertwined with the journalism I did during the time. It heavily informed the book.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your approach to writing the book. In some of my research, I found that you were actually were taking a well-known fable, in this case Peter Pan, and you were inverting it. So what were some of the challenges in writing in that way? And do you feel you were successful in achieving those goals?
I mean, the short answer to the second part of that question is no. I don't feel I was successful in the slightest. One of the defining traits of both the 2 published novels that I've written, the 3 unpublishable novels that I wrote before that, and everything I'm going to write, if I'm fortunate enough to keep doing this work, is that I reach beyond my grasp. One of the central sort of thoughts that never leaves my head during the entire construction project of every novel is, man, this is such a great idea. I wonder what a better writer would have done with it. You know, the ideas are good, and the, like, thematically, structurally, this notion of taking a comforting fairy tale that Westerners have been telling their kids for the better part of 100 years and inverting it is a really interesting idea. Whether I did it justice or not is entirely beyond me. What I wanted to do was return to the roots of that particular fable. When we talk about Peter Pan today, we usually talk about something like Peter Pan syndrome, you know, the man who refuses to stop acting like a child. The origins of that story are the exact opposite. J.M. Barrie, when he was a kid, his older brother died young. And it crushed the family. His mother never recovered. But one of the things his mother would say to try and comfort herself is, at least he'll never grow old. And so the origins are not about the man who refuses to stop acting like a child. It's about the child who never gets a chance to become a man. And for me, the fabulistic quality of the entire endeavor, the stage play and the book, in addition to the origin story, seemed like a perfect fit for the kind of novel I was trying to write. But that in no way means that I did it properly or successfully. It was just what I was reaching for.
Mm-hmm.